Welcome to the Ring Spaces studio in Neil on Business. Neil on Business is a show where we dig deep into the entrepreneurial mindset and try to discover what makes business success, from discipline to disruption. I'm your host, Neil Darling, entrepreneur, father, husband, and straight shooter when it comes to what it really takes to win in business. Each week, I'll plan to sit down with movers and shakers ranging from former Marines, business leaders, bold thinkers, and disruptors who traded uniforms for boardrooms and built successful businesses and brought the attitude and fortitude required for success. If you're looking for real conversations about leadership, grit, and building something that lasts, you're in the right place. Let's get to work. Hey, welcome.
Hey, Neil, thanks very much for having me on your podcast. It's really exciting. Really proud of you.
You're our latest guest. I'm pleased to have Robert J. Darling, Lieutenant Colonel retired, United States Marine Corps, on the latest episode of Neil on Business at the Ring Spaces studio here in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Well, Neil, it's a real honor. Like I said, I'm not only proud to be your brother, but proud to be on this podcast, especially when it comes to Neil on Business. I tell you, I've been learning from you for years.
Oh, here we go.
What do you got?
Well, I wanted to focus today. We've been spending, we call this Marine May, and we're actually focusing on getting the podcast launched and also talking with Marines in particular that have had a career and they've transitioned to entrepreneurial business. I mentioned to Michaela here, said, hey, I got somebody we should book. Somebody's got a pretty exciting story. So we're going to go through a little bit of your history,
okay,
and we'll start from the beginning. We're going to take as much time as we need here and really kind of transition from your career in the Marine Corps. How did you get where you're going, what you do in the Marine Corps? Tell a couple war stories, that would be good. And we're also going to cover the transition. And I think the focus today is really on crisis leadership and crisis management in business. I think it's fascinating. I know you put your foot in, not just your toe, your whole foot into making crisis management, a strength if you do the planning for a business. And I think we really should focus on that. And I do, because I know the story a little bit. Your transition and some of your experiences in the Marine Corps definitely related to your ability to help people with crisis management in your businesses.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. As you know, my experiences from the Marine Corps really drove my vision and mission to my time in business.
Yeah. So let's start from the beginning. So where are you from? Where are we from, I guess?
Yeah, we grew up in Newburgh, New York, back in the 70s and 80s. And then I eventually went to Iona College, New Rochelle, New York, not far away from home. I majored in economics. As you may remember, my ultimate job was to be a stockbroker. I used to have that joke that we used to say, I want to be so rich you didn't talk to the same two people twice throughout your whole life. But interesting enough, I was a freshman on campus back in 1983. And as you remember, October 23rd of 1983, we had the Beirut bombing.
Yeah.
241 Marines were wiped out in a place called Beirut, Lebanon. Yeah. I knew nothing about it. I wasn't focused on the military. I didn't know anything about the military. We knew we had a brother, Dennis, who enlisted in the Navy, but pretty much that was it. Our dad served in the Navy in the 60s. And the upperclassmen were running off to go find the Marine Corps recruiting officer called the OSO. And I was like, hey, what's the OSO? What are y'all doing? And they're like, we're going to join the Marine Corps. We're going to go off and help defend America. And I was like, wow, I need to find out more about that.
So you graduated when and from high school?
In 1983.
83, Iona, 4 years.
Iona, 4 years.
Right into the Marine Corps to Quantico, Virginia. We're really close to where we're at right now.
Absolutely. That's right. Because I met that Captain Cooper Rider, who was my recruiter. Yeah. And he was the one who was so instrumental in me being interested and focused on the Marine Corps. I did the ASVAB, I did all the MEPS, I did all the, everything to get qualified. And I was commissioned on the USS Intrepid in 1987, June of 1987, and off to Quantico, Virginia.
Yeah, in the shadow of the Twin Towers.
That's right, in the shadow of the Twin Towers, right there, New York City, on the USS Intrepid.
Okay, so you go and you got to go, boot camp, officer candidate school. You go to the basic school, and then you decide you want to be a pilot. So you go to flight school, I guess, in Florida.
That's right. You know, and you have to, you decide early on that you're going to either be qualified or not qualified to be a pilot.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to do. But I went down to Pensacola, Florida, like so many others before us. That's the cradle of naval aviation. And from there, I went off to Corpus Christi, Texas. They kind of divide the class up. You can either train in Texas or you can train in Florida. I went off to Texas, and then I came back after I selected Cobras. They sent me, or helicopters at that time, they sent me back to Pensacola to complete my naval aviation degree, if you will. I got my wings of gold.
Right.
And that happened in October of 1989. I was winged a naval aviator.
So I remember the joke, which you had the choice of being either infantry, being a grunt, or being a pilot. And I remember you saying that you wanted to ride into battle in air-conditioned comfort.
That's right. That's right. There's an old saying in the Marine Corps, never walk when you can ride, and never ride when you can fly. And especially in helicopters, you know, and we support the grunts. We support the infantry. That's our mission. And we used to always say, hey, we're right there behind you. We're right in front of you. We're right beside you. But we got the AC on, the air conditioning on. And we're not sitting in 105-degree temperature.
So you get to Texas and you're going to flight school. You're going for helicopters. And I know a lot of your friends are helicopter pilots even to this day. How do you end up in a Cobra?
It was interesting. I was at the basic school, and you mentioned that early on in Quantico, and we were out in the field, and we were learning infantry tactics and everything else. And one of the exercises we had that day was to complete a 9-line, they call it a 9-line brief, where you're talking to a section of aircraft, whether it be Harriers, Cobras, or Hueys, whatever else is airborne. And as a second lieutenant, you're giving them instructions on where you are, where the target is, and what you want them to do, ultimately to clear them hot so they can blow up a target. And I was a bumbling idiot on that 9-line brief. And finally, this voice over the radio, this Marine Corps captain said, Lieutenant, where are you? And I said, well, I'm on Hill Alpha Bravo 001. He said, I'll be right there. And next thing, over the trees, down low, is this Cobra helicopter, attack helicopter, full of ordnance. And he lands right in the field, right next to us, sends his co-pilot out of the front seat, who comes running over to say, hey, let's keep this simple. Here you are. Here we are. All I want to hear out of you is that we're cleared hot. Got it? And off he went. And I was like, I want to be that guy.
Yeah.
And Cobras became my mission.
So how does that selection happen? How do you decide whether you're going to be flying a Huey or a Chinook or a Cobra?
They keep breaking it down. At first, are you going to go jets, props, propellers, C-130s, or are you going to go helicopters? And there's a whole myriad of helicopters. That's the first decision point. And I said, no, I want to definitely go helicopters. Yeah. So if you want to go helicopters, and it's ranking by your class standing. Those who had the highest grades get to choose first, and those at the bottom of the class, they get what's left over. So I was right there at the cutoff, and I had the option to go jets or helicopters. And I decided, because of my experience with that Cobra pilot in Quantico, my goal was Cobras, and I'm going for my goal. So that day I selected helicopters. Yeah. And when you're finally getting ready to be winged at the end of your training, that's when you go in and say, what kind of helicopters does the Marine Corps have available? You know, they may have 1 Cobra spot and 5 Huey spots and 3 CH-53 spots. And they asked the top of the class, what do you want? What do you want? I was number 2 out of 14 or 15 aviators. And the first guy who was number 1 chose Hueys.
Yeah.
He came from a family legacy of, his dad was a Vietnam commanding officer of a Huey Cobra squadron at the time, and he wanted to be a Huey pilot, and that opened the door for me to fulfill my dream of becoming a Cobra pilot.
So really, it was very close. We could have been not bad. Hueys are fun to fly too, I guess.
Yeah, so it came right down to it.
Yeah. So you go, and then I guess you're heading East Coast. You get assigned to a squadron.
Yes.
What, North Carolina? I
was assigned to Jacksonville, North Carolina. So you go, the Cobra pilots go to the West Coast first for 6 months to get trained up in flying Cobras.
Right.
We call it the RAG, the Replacement Air Group. The new pilots go to that squadron in Camp Pendleton. Finished that. They sent me off. Now it's early 1990 when I check into HMLA, Marine Helicopter Light Attack Squadron 269 on the East Coast in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and I'm a brand new boot pilot.
Yeah, now you're the gun runners, right?
We're the gun runners.
Yeah,
that's right. And we got Cobras and Hueys in our squadron, and we were flying the AH-1T at the time, T for tow missile, had a tow missile system on it. And we had Hueys, like I said. But soon after, Neil, that August, right after I checked into the squadron, I've been there probably 4 months, 5 months now, then Desert Shield kicked off.
Yeah.
Saddam went into Kuwait. Everybody now is mobilizing. President H.W. Bush is sending, 300,000 troops halfway around the world. We're going to defend Saudi Arabia. And I got, before you know it, I was a boot, new pilot in the squadron heading to war.
Wow. So now this Storm and Norman, Schwarzkopf and shock and awe was taking place. The ground war hadn't kicked in yet.
No. And we got there in August. So Saddam, crossed the border August 1st or 2nd. And we were in country by August 15th, defending Saudi Arabia, setting up. We went out there. We had 15 aircraft, but we had no gas, no hydraulic fluid, no bullets. We got there so fast. We're waiting for the supply chain to catch up. Then we started training. And as you know, if you remember, Desert Shield went on all the way from August to January when the bombers started to hit the Iraqis in Kuwait. And that happened January 15th or something. And we were still in Saudi Arabia waiting for the air campaign to end, the bombing campaign to end, for us to move in with the infantry.
So there was people remember, but there was like a feint going on with some deception with the Iraqis were predicting where the attack would come from. And you were part of that feint, weren't you?
Yes. And we know we were part of the feint.
Yeah.
For operational security.
Right. We
believe, hey, we're going to go do, at some point in January, February, they moved us off of Saudi Arabian soil and they put us, all the ships had now pulled into the Persian Gulf. And we went on to be part of, we were on an LPD, a smaller amphib, the Shreveport, and they put a bunch of Cobras there, and they put some on the Nassau, which is an LHD, a bigger ship. So they kind of divided us all up to be part of what turned out to be, the fake attack.
Right.
And sure enough, we tricked. You saw the tanks come in from the west. Storm and Norman won the war, 100-hour ground war. But they invited us to augment those forces in Iraq and Kuwait. So we quickly, at the end, this talking about March timeframe of 1991, ran in there to assist with cleanup, with blowing up anything that was left over.
So I think this gets back to the crisis management comes later. I think it's initially you're taken with logistics, right? And when you see the amount of moving parts and coordination and things that have to happen to bring a nation to war. I think you remember you saying that the Marine Corps is one thing, but the Army moving stuff is really amazing.
Yeah, you have a great memory, by the way, because that's what struck me is, there's always this rivalry between the Army and the Navy, right? The Army and the Marine Corps especially. And who's a better force, who's a stronger force. And I learned quickly watching the buildup to Desert Storm that the Marine Corps might be the sharp end of the spear.
Yeah.
But the rest of the spear belongs to the Army.
Yeah.
Because we got there, and like I was said, we had no bullets, no hydraulic fluid, no nothing. When the Army finally got there, they show up for 2 years at least. They had Keebler elves, I said, building helicopters all night long. Their Mack trucks that rolled off the C-5 transports turned into office spaces. I was just in awe of the amount of equipment and people and resources that they had to sustain Desert Storm for years to come if they needed to be.
So when did it become, it was Desert Shield and then it became Desert Storm. So when the ground war started,
yes,
it became Desert Storm.
Yes.
So any crisis experience to tell us that, I'm not saying that necessarily war stories, but anything happened?
At the time, I didn't know I was getting such an education in crisis management and leadership. But what you see is through chaos, and the chaos of the day is we don't know what we don't know. You remember the Donald Rumsfeld saying, no
knowns, no unknowns.
Exactly. And that really happened every day because we would get a rumor that the Iraqis are on the move.
Right.
And everybody then is running out to go and prepare for a counteroffensive on the Iraqis. That information always turned out to be half-truth at best. But to see how everything adjusts on the fly with people doing what they're trained to do, keeping it simple where you can in a complex environment, was really instilled in me. And we had this thing in the Marine Corps too about compartmentalization. If you get overwhelmed with the noise, stop what you're doing, aviate, navigate, communicate, and compartmentalize on what needs to be done right now.
Right.
And then the rest will fall into place.
So I've heard a lot about Occam's razor, and it's like a concept where what you should do is really the most straightforward thing. Like if things get complicated, pick the simplest route, and you'll have the most likelihood of success.
That's exactly right. And if everyone just focused on what their job is instead of trying to understand the entire strategic landscape, everything becomes much easier. You just got to have a lot of trust in your leadership that they're going to do their job and they're going to make your ability to do your job easier.
So I love this story, and I'm just going to ask you about it. I know the war goes on, you do your part, you're part of the feint, you're in the desert, you're in Kuwait, you're doing a lot of things. But the joke was, how many Cobras do you have to crash to get promoted?
Well,
to get a medal, so tell us the story, in Kuwait, I believe it was, where you're on a training mission, your live fire exercise, and you're out and about. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, that story that you're referring to happened in 1993. So we'd come home from Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And now I'm part of another workup squadron a couple years later in 1993. And we're part of the MU, 2-4 MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit. And we deploy. We deployed back to the Persian Gulf. This is my second time in the Persian Gulf. And we're, hovering off the coast of Kuwait. So we use Kuwait as our training ground if we have to go north, right? They have the no-fly zones all set up, and they're being violated. The UN inspectors are looking for weapons of mass destruction, that whole thing. So we're in Kuwait, and we're going to do a night vision goggle exercise, a mission, training mission. And we have Hueys that are going to do a highlight, meaning there's moonlight, and mission, and the Cobras are going to take off later, and we're going to do a low light mission, no moon. Very, very good.
You're practicing with goggles, and as people know, even with the DC National accident, that was a training mission on goggles, and it's very, very difficult.
Exactly right. When you're flying's difficult enough, but when you're flying at nighttime on goggles, you're essentially looking through a toilet paper roll size field of view. You have no peripheral, nothing you can see out the right or left. You're only looking through a tube that's illuminating on a green screen what's in front of you. No depth. So it's very, very dangerous, and you got to be methodical and precise, and it takes a lot of training. So we go off for the training mission, and we got over the target area, and we checked in with the forward air controller on the ground. There's a Marine on the ground who's really the boss of the training on the ground. He's got the target. He knows the run-in headings, the safety brief we get from him. And we decided to take a racetrack pattern. That means let's split up. Let's put some separation between me and my wingman. And I'll roll in first. I'll hit the target. I'll roll off cold. You roll in behind me. You fire your ordnance. And then when you're off cold, I'll roll in again. So I roll in, and we acquired the target. Now we're shooting 20 millimeter HEI. 20 millimeter cannon is a Gatling gun off the front, and it shoots, 700 rounds a minute of, I was going to say, peace, love, and destruction coming out of the front of that. And then we got rockets. We got 2.75 folding inch rockets, and they all, when they blow up, they really light up the night sky, and that affects your goggles. So we dived down, and the hard deck was 200 feet off the ground, 200 feet AGL, right above the ground level, AGL. So we get an oral alert when you're at the hard deck. So that's your time to pull off, safe up your weapon system, and then turn and let your wingman go in. Well, my wingman, we pulled off. My wingman dove in, and he was lighting up a target. They were spot on. They were nailing it. But when they were doing that, they had rockets coming off and guns being fired, and sure enough, they ended up flying down to the hard deck, 200 feet. They didn't hear the oral alert because of all the weapons going off. They ended up flying through the hard deck, and like I said, the green screen, the toilet paper field of view, they ended up pulling off so low they hit the top of a sand dune at 125 miles an hour, and that just eviscerated the helicopter. The landing gear came off, the gun broke off, all the weapon systems come flying off the wing stubs, and they ended up hitting so hard, their goggles fell off their helmets, the attitude gyro in the helicopter broke, So they had no visual reference to the horizon. And now they're spinning out of control, bounced off the desert. And they're just both screaming and climbing at max power, both on the controls from the front and the back. And they're climbing out of control, and they're screaming over the radio, "We've hit the ground. We've hit. And now I'm rolling back in with my wingman. I mean, my co-pilot, his name was Kid. And we're trying to acquire them and trying to help them any way we can.
Right. So people know that the Cobra is a 2-seat helicopter. You sit with the gunner pretty much sits in the front, but you both have controls, and the pilot of command is in the back. So you're actually sitting right behind the gunner. Is that right?
That's right. I'm in the back. And really the Cobra is divided as a weapons platform, right? So though you can fly from either seat, the front seat is primarily a weapons delivery for the anti-tank missiles.
Yeah.
And the back is the primary pilot, and you also have weapons control, but it depends on what the mission is. But like you said, tandem. So they hit the ground, and Kid's my front seat pilot, and they're now screaming and climbing out of control, spinning from 0 to out, just up in the atmosphere. And we're trying to acquire them and catch up to them to see if they're all right. So sure enough, I'm climbing. I'm like, "Kid, do you see them? Can you make out?" And it's hard for us to acquire them because they're not going forward. They're going straight up. They're just spinning straight up, max power, out of control, horrified about what just happened, trying to acquire their instruments. They have no goggles. They're in pitch black environment, and everybody's on the radio, and we're trying to get them. We finally catch up to them at 2,000 feet AGL off the ground. Yeah. And as I catch up and I'm talking to them, and call sign Box, and the back seat was Irish, and I guess it was Boxers in the back and Irish up front. And I convinced them both, and I found out they were both fighting each other on the controls because they were horrified what just happened. And I convinced them to push the nose over. Let's level off. Let's start going forward. You're flying. You're okay. We go back to aviate, navigate, communicate, breaking that compartmentalization down.
Yeah.
And it took what seemed like forever, but we got them back under control, now flying straight and level as we're assessing the damage to that aircraft, which was substantial. We saw the gun was gone. There was a wire bundle, shooting sparks underneath from the electronics that was powering the gun. There was no landing gear, and there were no weapons.
So what do you do?
That was the question of the day, is where do we take them? And the other thing we had to assess is how badly damaged is this helicopter? What can't we see?
Right.
Like, for example, are they leaking hydraulic fluid? Because if you drain all your hydraulic fluid, will you be able to fly the aircraft? Will you be able to put control inputs on? Everything's hydraulically driven. You just don't mechanically push that rotor system around.
Right.
There's hydraulics. So we had to make the decision that, how's it look in the cockpit? You guys okay? Tell me what you see. Are you vibrating? Are you losing pressure? Is there anything that are we going to land in the desert in the middle of the night here in Kuwait, or can we make it to an airfield? And we found that Kuwait International was 56 miles away. Their aircraft, though damaged, was staying stable. They didn't have any other indications that it was coming apart. So we eased them over to the left and gave them a heading. Now we're flying behind them because in case they go down, we want to be able to see where they went down, as opposed to lost sight of them.
Yeah.
And we pointed them towards Kuwait International. And we made it. We're 10 miles out. It's time to talk to air traffic control. And we call air traffic control. We're a flight of 2.
Declared emergency, yeah.
We declared an emergency. We're a flight of 2 American military helicopters. We're declaring an emergency, and we're 10 miles to the west inbound. Well, they had broken English. They could speak English, but it wasn't their first language.
Right.
And so they're like, "Where are you? We don't understand where you are. Can you tell us again? Who are you?" So we're going through all of that and trying to deal on the radio. And not just that, we're talking to the squadron. We're talking to range. We're talking to everyone of what we're doing. Are you guys landing in the desert? You trying to make it to the airport? Where are you going to go and handle this emergency? They finally passed us off the tower. Tower's like, "I don't know where you are. We have airliners landing. Can you circle to the left and to the right?" And we're like, "No, tower, we're not. We're straight inbound. We have traffic in sight. We'll take control of our own landing instructions." Somebody in the tower was smart enough to activate crash fire rescue. Right. They pulled out the fire trucks at the at the firehouse, and we could see the lights.
You saw the flashing lights.
We saw the lights, and we're like, we have crash fire in sight. We're going to them.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to drive around and find us. We went right to them, over top everybody else.
So you're nobody ever parks in the parking lot of the firehouse, but that's pretty much what you had to do.
That's right. There's not a landing zone there, but
Yeah.
2 helicopters come in. One's badly damaged, and sure enough, we landed first. I had Kid, my co-pilot, jump out to go and brief the fire department on who we are and what just happened to us and what we need them to do.
So you land first. He's in a hover.
He's in a hover. He can't land.
And he's got no skids, so if he lands, it's gonna
roll.
It's gonna roll over, and
Hit the ground, shrapnel,
the
fireball.
weight will go everywhere. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
So Kid is now briefing the fire department, the Kuwaiti fire department, and they're like, no, we're not going to guide a potential crash.
Yeah.
We're here for post crash.
Right.
That's what we're good for. So they passed off the wands and the whole thing and said, you're on your own. We'll stand by.
Right.
And they started moving aircraft out of the way that were in the vicinity in case the helicopter hit the ground and cartwheeled over. They wanted to make sure there was no aircraft around.
What time's of the essence? What was the time factor?
We figured, and this is Box in the damaged aircraft telling me he's got 10 minutes of fuel left.
Oh my gosh.
10 minutes. We don't have anything for him to land on. And now I'm telling Kid, my co-pilot, he's got 10 minutes. You got to find something that we can prop up underneath his wing stubs, his elbows, and land that helicopter on.
So Kid runs all the way to the hangar.
There's a nearby hangar, and I say nearby, probably an eighth of a mile away. And he sprints off in this hangar now with 10 minutes trying to find something that he can bring out to this. And we're like, hey, Box, it's going to be all right. I got this, 8 minutes of fuel left. We're counting down. Holy mackerel. And here comes Kid on a tow tractor towing 2 4-foot-high Air Force pallets. And where did he get these pallets? He found a tow tractor, and he's out there in time. And now we're propping up these 4-foot-high pallets underneath Box's damaged aircraft as he's running out of fuel. And we're trying to get them all, strapped down so they don't blow away with the rotor, downwash. And we get him all in position, and he's about ready to flame out. And beautifully, he touched down on these pallets. And literally no loss of life, no addition.
You actually had to guide him onto the pallet. I mean, how did he see the pallets? You can't see him.
He can't see him. So Kid was right out there with the wands, and either him or I at that time, or somehow we had the wands, and we guided him down. He landed on his elbows. Helicopter safe. They jump out. We had a 4-man group hug. It's going to be okay. What an ordeal. And Crash Fire is grateful that we didn't, tip this thing over and have a tragedy right there at Kuwait International. And for a brief moment, there was this big relief and group hug that we're all going to be okay.
Yeah. And then the boss shows up.
Well, lots of questions all of a sudden start coming up, like, hey, Kid, where the heck did you find these pallets? And he goes, I ran into the hangar over there, and there was this Marine. There's this Marine. What do you mean there was a Marine? Where's the Marine? He goes, I don't know his name, and blah blah blah. I didn't get. I go, why was a Marine over in this, not in the civilian terminal, but this strange hangar over at Kuwait International that houses other aircraft? I don't know. Did you get his name? No, I didn't get his name. We never found that Marine. We said it was their guardian angel, either Irish or Box, had their guardian angel building pallets over in this hangar that just happened to have a tow truck, a tow tug,
The keys to the tow truck.
everything
was like,
and 2 built pallets, so Kid could drive those out. And we never found that Marine again. It was true divine intervention for us that night.
so you gave him a name, I guess.
He had Corporal, and then it might be in the book, it's Corporal Murray or Murphy.
Yeah.
And we did our best. We called later on, we called around to say, does anybody got a Corporal Murphy in their command? And no, we don't have it.
Yeah.
No. Anybody going home on emergency leave that was a quitting? No. So we never identified or found Corporal Murphy, but he was there.
He was like, pallets over here, tractors over here. And it happened that your co-pilot was a maintenance officer. So he knew his way around he knew how to drive a tractor. Not everybody knows how to do that.
That's true.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Kid had the training on the truck.
And you had 10 minutes, the clock was running with 10 minutes.
We had 10 minutes, and so we had divine intervention that night.
So that's amazing story.
And everybody shows up. The squadron commanding officer now shows up and, making sure everybody's okay. But we had to start the accident investigation. And we just found out we're getting orders to Somalia because of the deteriorating situation in Somalia. This is about April, May, June of 1993. We're diverting out of the Persian Gulf. We need to go to Somalia.
So that's the same time as the Army and Black Hawk Down, the movie, and just the turmoil and chaos that you're going to end up getting into. But you're training, I guess, in Kuwait to go to Mogadishu in support of the guys on the ground, right?
It was a UN mission.
Yeah.
And we were going to go then and support that UN mission. This is prior to Black Hawk Down.
Oh, that's okay.
So we got there in April, late May, early June of 1993. Black Hawk Down was October.
Okay.
So we had the mission first. The Army had the mission supporting a UN peacekeeping mission.
Yeah.
It wasn't combat operations yet.
Yeah.
And our job was to support the food delivery to all these villages in and around Somalia, Africa, Mogadishu.
Yeah.
And the Cobras would escort, all this convoy of marine equipment carrying USAID food into these villages. It wasn't until August of that year that we found out that General Adid, the warlord from Somalia, was stealing our aid and it wasn't getting to the people. And he became then an outlaw, and the United States said, bring him to justice. So that became a combat mission for us, is to find out where he's at and to bring him to justice. So before we get to Black Hawk Down, to tell you about timing, we found out through intelligence agencies, our intelligence agencies that were on the ground there in Mogadishu, that General Adid traveled in 3 white Land Cruisers. Mm-hmm. And he's in the middle Land Cruiser normally. Mm-hmm. So we had briefed, if he gets out of Mogadishu and we spot those Land Cruisers, then who's going to take out the first vehicle and the third vehicle? And we had all the special forces on board the cargo helicopters, the CH-46s, that were going to swoop in and arrest General Adid. The bell goes off. We're over the horizon. We're on the ship, the USS Wasp. It's a big mini aircraft carrier designed to carry helicopters. CIA or the intelligence agencies are saying he's on the move. So we took off with this big combat armada. We had Harriers in the air. We had Hueys with snipers. We had the special forces, the Cobras. And our job was to make sure nobody came to help this convoy of 3 white Land Cruisers. And they rolled in, Neil, and talk about timing. We were supposed to let him get a half mile outside of Mogadishu before he was engaged. And through our apprehension, excitement that we got him, he got an eighth of a mile. And we lit up the first and third vehicles like we should have. Everybody, they're gone. And we see him get out of the middle vehicle. He's running back towards Mogadishu, where 1,000 Somalis are now running down the road towards him. Special forces gets on the ground. We're trying to do a blocking maneuver from the people to him. And next thing you know is a clash of titans. He disappears into the crowd. And we end up just plowing through all these Somalis with the special forces guys trying to figure out who was General Adid. And sure enough, he slipped away. Because he slipped away, and we ended up aborting that mission, carrying some wounded Somalis back to the ship and the whole thing, and we went back, and he got away. They were prepared next time. They were waiting for the Army, and they had Black Hawk Down.
Oh, wow.
An eighth of a mile could have changed the outcome of everything. If we would have got them, they wouldn't have had a Black Hawk Down situation.
Wow.
But because we didn't get them, they had the mission. We had to go home, and they had Black Hawk Down.
So they eventually got him, right? Yeah.
They eventually got him,
yeah.
And he was brought to justice, but not until after that Black Hawk Down event. He eventually was, I think, killed by his own. His son tried to take over, and I don't think that worked out for him. He was probably arrested, and so that family lost power.
Yeah. Okay. So after that, when do you start heading stateside?
We got back, and the Black Hawk Down happened in October. We were home late August, early September. We thought maybe they were going to turn us around, send us back, but the President Clinton at the time just came into office, and his Secretary of Defense, Les Aspin, they decided that the U.S. had had enough, and they pulled our forces out of Somalia rather than double down into that quagmire, and we all came home. I left the squadron in April of 1994, and I went out to be a NATOPS instructor, a senior instructor in the replacement air group, that squadron. We call it the RAG, and back to Camp Pendleton.
So you're flying Whiskey Cobras in California now as an instructor?
Yes. And everybody who gets winged, who's now showing up like I did years before, my job is to train them to fly the Cobra before they go to their first squadron. Yeah. And that was a 2-year assignment for me.
Yeah, I remember that. I came out to visit you, I remember, and you took me to the whiskey simulator, and we got to fly over North Korea. It's so funny. I was so proud of my brother. Brother's a badass, fighter pilot, helicopter pilot, attack helicopter pilot, and we were flying over simulated North Korea, and we got shot down. It was pretty violent.
Well, you could tell the joke that was on me. I took them into the simulator, and I said, give us the integrated air defense of North Korea. We're ready. They armed us up with every possible weapon combination available, and we're flying through the simulator. We're doing great, and Neil's up front firing the toes. He's doing great, and all of a sudden, an enemy helicopter flew by us in the windscreen, and now we carry air-to-air missiles on the Cobra. So I was all excited. I'm going to show my brother how we shoot down this Russian-made helicopter called the Hind, which is their attack helicopter. And we roll in behind him when we're screaming on the radio, let's get locked, we got the tone, we got everything else like that. And the missile would not come off the rail on my collective. And I'm like, I don't know why the missile won't come off the rail. It's just not working. And all of a sudden we hear in the headset, the instructor of the simulator go, because you're trying to kill it with your searchlight.
No. You keep switch on and off. It's not hard, but it was keep flashing a bright light in the Hind's eyes.
Exactly. Right next to the launch button for the AIM-9 Sidewinder is the searchlight. And I am pressuring that switch left and right, wondering why the missile won't come off. It's because I'm trying to blind the Hind, not shoot it down.
So we were DOA. We were dead there.
So we laughed, and of course I ate a lot of turkey on Thanksgiving, literally and figuratively.
So you end up being an instructor for
2 years.
Young lieutenants out there in beautiful California. How was that?
Time of my life.
Yeah.
To give back, to tell them about what flying overseas and in hostile environments is like, and you have to transition them from this very administrative type fly by the numbers to learn how to fly by the seat of the pants.
Right.
And what's expected of you. Do you go fast or slow? And do you pull power? Is it all guns blazing all the time? No. And you really now get them from their cognitive abilities into the intuitive ability to handle an attack helicopter.
So was that uneventful, or did you wait?
Well, uneventful, no, there's no such thing as uneventful. We had and you and I briefly spoke about this before, even there, I had a student who was learning, and it's a very long story, but we took off on a training mission, a flight of 2. My Dash 2 had a maintenance problem, so we went out to the training area waiting on him, and we were practicing low-level maneuvers, like how fast can you stop a Cobra helicopter when you're just over the trees. So you fly only about 80 miles an hour, but then you have to come to a pinpoint stop. So you elevate the nose real high, and you got to keep the tail rotor from hitting the trees.
Yeah.
And it is a precision maneuver, and my student was doing it great. And he asked if he could do another one, and I said, yep, and we're waiting on our wingman. He's inbound. Yeah, go ahead and do another one. And that last one didn't go well. He had pulled back in the nose, he held it up too high, and we started to sink via the tail rotor, which is a no-no, because your tail rotor can't go
left, right, yeah.
You can't go into the trees. And when we all recovered, I jumped on the controls to push the stick forward to make sure we had max power. We ended up pancaking and hitting the ground just hard enough to spread the skids and break the gun and do what I say is significant. Significant is in the eye of the beholder, but to me, it was significant damage. And now we had to wait for the squadron to all come out. The maintainers had to come out to make sure we weren't going to roll over, because we had actually broken the bar on the skids to make sure. So the skids were less than perfect, right? We didn't know if it was going to continue to hold the helicopter up, so we stayed turning with the engines on in case we had to hover, but we knew we had damaged skids. It turned out They propped it up. We shut it down. We went in. We had to go through that whole accident investigation, but it all worked out. The lieutenant went on, and I, stayed in the squadron. And ultimately, they deemed it not my fault.
Yeah, and so much so that you moved on from there. You went to the USA hockey team, gold team of helicopter pilots. Where did you end up?
Well, we ended up at, I went recruiting for 2 years.
Oh, that's right.
And then I ended up in 1998 flying with Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, HMX 1, the presidential helicopter squadron. President Clinton was still in office at the time. His vice president was Al Gore. Our primary mission is to support the president worldwide in that squadron. It's high visibility, a real honor for the Marine Corps to have that mission. And so we take it very, very seriously, and it's a very prestigious duty station. So
that's a 4-year commit. It's a very long time to, you're flying the press, you fly the Secret Service, you fly whatever. And then you occasionally would step, if there's a problem in the aircraft, you would be the backup aircraft. Do you ever fly the president?
Oh, yeah. And it is like you said, it's a 4-year tour, and you start off as, it's not based on rank.
Yeah.
Even your ability, it's based on your seniority in a squadron. So everybody starts off as a freshman, and the freshman carries the gear, and the seniors carry the president.
Yeah.
And every year you hope to get more and more authority to the point where you're carrying the president. And in my second year, I was blessed enough to become a co-pilot for President Clinton. And a pilot in command for Vice President Gore. So I had lots of vice president missions, and literally had the distinct pleasure to land in the White House lawn as a co-pilot at least 10 times for President Clinton.
Yeah. How is that?
What an honor it is to be able to say you were one of the few that was able to land on the south lawn of the White House.
Yeah. So you're not there for 4 years. You decide to pivot. You like the White House, and you said there's another opportunity. So tell us about that.
Well, the squadron is a 4-year tour, and the squadron had a few external positions, if you will. And one of them was to work up in the White House in airlift operations.
Right.
And in this joint office, there was somebody from the Air Force One crew. I was the representative from the Marine Corps Helicopter Squadron 1 crew, HMX. So it was an HMX billet, but it was a non-flying billet, suit and tie, doing airlift operations. And when I mentioned earlier to you, we fly the president worldwide. A lot of people don't understand that we can't outrun Air Force One with these helicopters.
Right.
So that means we have to load them in cargo planes, Air Force heavy lift cargo planes like the C-5 and C-17, and fly all over the world in advance of Air Force One.
Right.
And that airlift operations mission is a logistics mission, like you mentioned earlier, to make sure we have snipers, doctors, helicopters, phones, everything, Secret Service, everything you can imagine. So when the president gets there on Air Force One, we have all that equipment rehearsed, maintained, and ready to support him for his political agenda.
Yeah. So you ended up in Vietnam. You went with the presidents of Vietnam, right?
I went on the advance, and I helped set up for HMX to come to Vietnam. We made sure we had landing zones, and we had hangar space and the whole thing. So when the cargo planes started showing up, they already had their space. They knew where they're going to do maintenance on the helicopters. Yeah. We had the landing zones, the hospitals, everything was picked out. And then I went with the president on the backup Air Force One to Vietnam to make sure everything on the ground was operating smoothly. It was a real honor to do that.
So now we're in 2001, obviously, right?
So now the president leaves in January of 2001.
Okay, and Bush is coming in.
And the President Bush came in. Now, he was a governor from Texas. He's a new president. We're apolitical. We support any president. So when the entire staff turns over, the military office, airlift operations, doesn't turn over.
Yeah.
We're there to support no matter who it is. And the president has got to go through a learning curve. It
was very slow. I mean, you compare it now, there's depending on who you talk to, when you have a new administration come in, it's very rare that you have so frenetic a pace as we're seeing in the past few months now. Back then, it was sort of steady as she goes. There wasn't a lot going on. They were kind of learning the ropes. You didn't really hear a lot from Bush. When did we? So obviously, we're getting into the summer, and you get into September, right?
We get into September of 2001, and like I said, I'm working in airlift operations, and I became one of the senior officers, and we rotate duties because Some days some weeks you're very busy supporting the president with his logistics and helicopters and phones and snipers. And then it could be a first lady or it could be the vice president. Yeah. So we rotate. But the week of September 11th, 2001, I was the Airlift Operations Officer in charge, and I had pre-planned and that support mission for President Bush to go to Sarasota. Yeah. So we moved all the limousines, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and phones. Right. And now on September 11th, that Tuesday morning, we're monitoring from the Eisenhower building, the executive office building adjacent to the West Wing. We're monitoring the president's trip to Sarasota. Yep. To make sure that the helicopters don't need extra parts, the limousines are working, the doctors have everything they need from a logistics perspective. And we all watched the world change on September 11th.
So what happened? So you're in the White House, and pretty much like everybody else, right? You saw it on CNN, and then what was the reaction? That's interesting.
So Neil and I know that, you know, you may have heard this before, but it was a very surreal event. We got in at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. We have our morning meeting. We're talking about the president and how his schedule is going and how all the equipment's working. When someone ran into our morning meeting and said, this is at 8:46, that an aircraft hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center complex. Just like everybody else, we went right into our little operation center. We're staring at the TV set, and we're trying to wonder why a pilot would run into a 110-story building in the city of New York on such a beautiful day. 78 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. And by the way, that's a pretty big hole for a Cessna. Right. And things are starting to unravel. The phones are starting to ring. American Airlines Flight 11 departed out of Boston on its way out to Los Angeles, hijacked down the Hudson River into the North Tower.
Wow. Okay. So that was the first one.
That was the first one. And soon after, we're still watching the TV. We still didn't know it was terrorism at the time. And we saw United Airlines Flight 175 literally in front of all of us come on the screen. I would say 1 billion people must have watched it. And it careened into the South Tower at 9:03 at what looked like full power to all of us. My boss at the time, who was a full bird Air Force colonel, came in and said, everyone stop what you're doing, eyeballs on me. We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding in the city of New York, and I need everybody to stand by for White House designated missions. That comes down to, well, what is that? Well, whenever we have a national tragedy, the U.S. government is got either expertise or resources, and every government agency or organization wants to help out. Yeah. They all have a role to play. And the way they get there is through the Department of Defense. Yeah. Well, the Department of Defense has only got so many airplanes at any given time, and they don't think one government agency is more important than the other. So when you call in and you request, you get put into a queue, and when a plane becomes available, you can go and support the mission to help them.
So that was they cracked open the book on the continuity government.
Absolutely, they did. Yeah. And now the whole continuity government, classified programs, but essentially we have to split up the government. So no matter what happens in the world, the presidency must survive, and our 3 branches of government must continue to function.
So what happens next? Now, the Pentagon had not been hit yet, right?
The Pentagon's not hit. We have 2 towers burning. We're diverting every airplane we can into Andrews, Joint Base Andrews, which is 15 miles to our east. The White House wants everything we got to New York City to help the people of New York. When all of a sudden an airplane overflies the White House, and that's prohibited airspace. If you're not Marine One, nobody overflies the White House. And we heard breaking news. The Pentagon was just struck by American Airlines Flight 77. We don't have an air attack on New York City. We have an air attack in the northeast quadrant of the United States. It just escalates everything. And now the White House literally is part of that area.
Crosshairs, yeah.
So for the second time in American history, all the loudspeakers blared to life, evacuate the White House, evacuate the Eisenhower Executive Office building, everyone secure your classified information, and go to the alternate site. That colonel came running in and said, you heard it, lock it up, shut it down, we're out of here. And I grabbed him and said, Colonel, I can't leave. President Bush is not coming back to Washington, D.C. Wherever they're going to take him, because Washington's under attack, wherever they're going to take him, he needs limousines, snipers, doctors, helicopters, and phone. He needs the package.
Right. So you had the duty binder that day, I guess.
I had the duty briefcase that day for sure.
Yeah.
And it was not unlike the football.
Yeah.
It was a logistics football.
Yeah.
It had everything logistically and all the phone numbers and everything you can imagine to support the president.
Right.
And I was ordered underground into the President's Emergency Operations Center, the bunker under the White House. And they say, I'm allowed to tell you about it, but I can't tell you how thick the walls are or how deep it is or how to get there. But the bunker exists. It was built back in the 60s, a nuclear hardened facility, a safe place for the president. Mm-hmm. And we're going to go down there and we're going to do logistics to support the president wherever they're going to take him today. And that was my mission. Get across the street, show my credentials. Secret Service let me in. At the same time, above ground, they literally are evacuating the White House, and they're pushing people to the north and to the south and saying they're yelling on bullhorns to Secret Services that there's another plane inbound.
So this is the flight over Pennsylvania.
This is United Flight 93, but that wasn't what really violated the White House airspace.
Oh, okay.
If back on September 11th, we were doing a large Air Force nuclear command and control exercise.
Yeah.
We had parked one of our special aviation assets called an Air Force E-4B.
Looking glass, right?
It's Night Watch.
Night Watch, okay.
Night Watch. It was over at Andrews for the exercise. Parked at Andrews. And when the second tower was struck, the South Tower was hit, the Pentagon activated that air crew and said, get to the President of the United States. If our president wants to climb off Air Force One and climb onto this combat plane called this Air Force E-4B, those two 747s need to figure out what they're going to do. But that plane took off and overflew the White House on its way to Sarasota, Florida, but they didn't care because they were on a real world emergency mission to get to the President of the United States. But the White House didn't know who that was at the time. So that made Secret Service run into the Vice President's office, literally pick him up by his elbows and force him underground.
So that was Dick Cheney.
That was Dick Cheney.
They carried Big Dick downstairs.
They literally carried him downstairs. So I get down into the bunker. I'm down there, and the first person I see is Vice President's military aide. He was an Air Force major. I was a Marine Corps major at the time. We were friends. And he was down there kind of command and control of that bunker at the time. He was the first one there, senior guy there, and he was watching all the military members do their job, taking notes, answering the phones. As soon as I walked in, I was like, hey, Tom, I'm here to support the president with logistics. He goes, Bob, forget logistics. Help me out. Answer the phones. They're ringing off the hook. So I looked around. Everybody's down there answering the phones, but I could see in the corner over there an empty desk, an empty cubicle. As I got closer to it, I could see the phone was ringing. I could hear it. So I dropped the planning kit and I picked up my phone call 7 minutes after the White House was ordered evacuated. The gentleman on the other end was calling from the Situation Room upstairs in the West Wing, now downstairs into the bunker, to tell me there's another hijacked aircraft somewhere south of Pittsburgh, inbound Washington, D.C. I turned around to tell the mill aide, and all of a sudden Vice President Cheney is inches from my face going, Major, what do you got? Because he had just arrived in the bunker. And I really snapped my heels together. Mr. Vice President, 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, inbound, we have another hijacked airplane that turned out to be Flight 93.
Wow.
This is what I'm about to tell you now, Neil, was really the genesis of my desire to get more involved with crisis leadership and decision making. Because Vice President Cheney turned around and now reached out to the Pentagon. He was reaching out to Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Because the U.S. military, in times of combat operations, we only take orders from two people, primarily. Anyone can defend themselves. But if you're going to go and do offensive combat operations, you take orders from the National Command Authority. That's made up of the President of the United States, Secretary of Defense. The National Command Authority has got the authority to order troops across a border. So if you're going to wipe out an army, kill a terrorist, overthrow a government, it comes from the National Command Authority. Vice President Cheney is not part of the military chain of command. He's fully briefed and read in,
Right.
but you have to invoke the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution if the president's ever killed to transfer those powers from the president to the vice president. So Vice President Cheney is reaching out to Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, but Donald Rumsfeld is not there. And you say, why not?
Unknown unknowns.
Unknown unknowns. They entered his office at the Pentagon at 8:46 when the first tower was hit. And he said, listen, I don't know what's going on in New York. Keep me apprised of what's happening. As soon as 9:03 happened, the second South Tower was hit. They re-entered his office, but he was due for an intelligence briefing on what was happening. So he didn't respond back to the National Military Command Center, the war room in the Pentagon, because he wanted to get his intelligence brief.
Yeah.
At 9:37, with the impact in the Pentagon, he ran outside. His building was literally impacted. He wanted to save lives. A pretty admirable thing to do, but not his appointed place of duty. We now have a president trying to get airborne and a Secretary of Defense lost among thousands in the Pentagon parking lot trying to save lives. Nobody at the helm of our national military command and control structure to tell our pilots how to defend America.
Right.
We were flabbergasted, to say the least, that the command and control structure of the United States has just crumbled.
Yeah.
We don't have anyone at the top telling us how to defend America.
So what did Cheney do?
He inserted himself into the military chain of command. He, as you know, was a former Secretary of Defense under the first President H.W. Bush.
Right.
So he's not that he didn't know the procedures and the policies and the emergency aircraft that we have on alert. So he ended up assuming his old post, if you will.
Yeah.
And said, get me 2 F-15s, get them out of Otis Air National Guard Base, Cape Cod. Let me know when they're airborne and stand by to shoot this aircraft down.
Wow.
We heard from the Pentagon to Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. That first phone call goes out to NORAD. That's where NORAD headquarters is. They buttoned up the mountain for the first time in anger in American history.
So that's a change in the DEFCON level, right? And
Not yet.
not yet. Okay.
Okay. So that 4-star Air Force commander buttoned up the mountain in Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado. And now they call their air defense sectors. We have a Northeast air defense sector and we have a Southeast and there's a West Coast. And he got the Northeast air defense sector, which is a 2-star on the phone. And he scrambled, he launched those 2 F-15s and gave them weapons free to engage. So we're in the bunker. We're hearing all this on all the satellite radios. F-15s are airborne. They're supersonic over Long Island, New York, 300 miles away from United Flight 93. They're going so fast, they're going to be in weapons-free parameter in 6 minutes.
You know, any pilot would tell you that, you know, even with a weapons free, you still have to make visual identification of what you're shooting at. Certainly if it's a civilian airliner, right?
Not necessarily the case. Again, remember I said we got to trust our leaders?
Yeah.
When you get orders that come down and they're telling you you're weapons free, you're not questioning those orders going, do you think this is a legal order? Do you think I need to visualize this thing? Or do I fly my aircraft, get in combat parameters, get a tone, and put that steel on target the way I've been instructed? That's what they were doing. You don't think beyond that. You compartmentalize and think my duty is to defend America against whatever that threat that someone else deemed it was is to be.
That's fascinating. So you're saying that they had weapons free, supersonic, flying from Cape Cod, and they were going to shoot down a civilian airliner.
They were going to shoot down United Flight 93. As a matter of fact, Neil, at 10:05, all those satellite radios blared to life. Aircraft down, 60 miles south of Pittsburgh in the city of Shanksville.
Yeah.
No survivors. We, for a brief moment in the bunker, thought we shot United Flight 93 down on orders from the vice president to the Pentagon National Military Command Center to NORAD to the Northeast Air Defense Sector. We just shot down a civilian airliner. Immediately, everybody's like the air sucked out of the room.
Wow.
Vice President Cheney was staring at those 3 speaker boxes. He walked right over to me and he goes, Major, for the congressional investigation, state your full name. And he wanted to know who I was and the chain of command and the times. And he wanted to get the history right. And he said, I really need to talk to the president. And we're trying to reach President Bush on the phone. And he's now airborne on Air Force One when those same satellite radios blared to life that we never fired. United Flight 93 was on the ground in Shanksville due to the heroics of people like Tom Burnett, and Todd Beamer.
Todd Beamer.
38 others who united on that aircraft.
Yeah.
And we believe they got into the cockpit, hands-on terrorist, but ultimately the plane rolled upside down and hit straight down in the field in Shanksville at over 500 miles an hour.
Oh.
Yeah. But now try to imagine what it was like in the bunker. A sense of despair, we have another plane down, and a sense of elation that we didn't shoot it down.
Yeah.
We were really in a quagmire worth of emotion, right? We were so glad that we didn't have to use American combat power to kill American citizens that were victims of a hijacking. That instead they fought back with everything and prevented these terrorists from reaching their target. And we believe their target, according to the FBI, would have been the dome on the U.S. Capitol. They hit our financial capital, they hit our military capital, and they were trying to take out the symbol of our American process, our democratic process, our freedoms by hitting the dome on the U.S. Capitol.
Do the likes of Todd Beamer and all those people, they basically sacrificed themselves to save the Capitol.
Yeah, true American heroes. And this was the learning point of the day is our country isn't great because of our U.S. military. Our country is truly great because of the civilians and Americans that will put everything aside in times of crisis or times of emergency and just save the life of a complete stranger. The humanity of it all.
So I'm just interested about you. So your thought process when this is all going on. I mean, did you ever step outside of yourself and say, I've been down in the bunker for 13 minutes or 23 minutes. And when did you realize like what was going on?
You know, great question. My adrenaline was so high. I was in the middle of it. I really wanted to compartmentalize and do my job the best way I could. I wanted to be value add to Vice President Cheney. I wasn't thinking about anything else other than to be the best phone operator imaginable down there on his behalf. It wasn't until later on in the day that when different things were happening, we got a little moment to reflect on it, that I realized the importance of where I am at this moment in history and how proud I was to stand shoulder to shoulder with Vice President Cheney, who had the courage, right or wrong, to make these decisions to defend America.
So that was the end of the action. You said that there was another unidentified object, flying object coming up the Potomac River at some point. Is that?
Yeah, the day was just full of those type of events. Soon after that, the Secret Service called downstairs again and said 8 miles out, we have another unidentified aircraft, this time heading for the White House.
Right.
8 miles away. Vice President Cheney then ran back in from the executive briefing room into the ops center and immediately got patched through to the Pentagon again, but Donald Rumsfeld was in the Pentagon now. He was in the National Military Command Center. And we're telling him we have a bogey aircraft. A bogey is an unidentified aircraft. If that aircraft gets identified as being hostile, we'll elevate its status to bandit. When we don't know what it is, it's a bogey.
Gotcha.
If it's a friendly, it's a friendly. So we got a bogey. So I'm reporting to Vice President Cheney, bogey 7 miles out inbound. He's talking to Donald Rumsfeld.
Oh my gosh.
We got a bogey 6 miles out inbound. Do we have a weapon system that we can take a shot at this guy? And literally Secret Service and I are counting down 5, 4. And you got to think there's thousands of people outside and we're going to end up, they're attacking the White House with another one. And we found out we have fighter cap, but not yet in position. They're scrambling. And he's like, whatever you got, I'll authorize an over the horizon. You could fire from Baltimore if you have to, but kill him, kill him. And next thing you know, I said, Mr. Vice President, 3, 2. And he goes, stop counting. If Secret Service can't deal with it on the roof, everybody stand by for impact. We thought we were checkmate. We thought we were going to take a blow right there at the White House, with thousands of people being pushed to the north and south. When all the loudspeakers blared to life, that's an Army medevac helicopter carrying 6 Army doctors from Fort Belvoir trying to make it to the Pentagon to save lives.
Yeah.
The procedures are that they're supposed to call Reagan National Airport for, permission to enter the airspace. But with the flyover of American Airlines Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon, the tower had evacuated at Reagan National. So there was nobody there to give them permission or to answer their calls.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And we were trying to kill them.
And those doctors, most likely were saying, hey, get us there. People were injured. They wanted to go help.
Yeah. Try to imagine they can see the Pentagon burning.
Yeah.
They're 4 miles away. And they're like, let's just get low and fast and hopefully nobody even notices, but get us there. We have lives to save. And we were doing everything in our power to try to kill them.
Wow. So they got there. They probably didn't know what happened.
They didn't know
that they were not this close to, catching a missile up the
no.
pipe,
But when I walked away from this, when we had a chance to breathe, I was really just shocked at the breakdown of authority and authorizations and orders by the Secretary of Defense being lost in the parking lot and President trying to get airborne, and how this national command authority that we put so much authority in and trust in just wasn't there for us on 9/11.
Yeah. So one other notable thing, I guess, so I mentioned the DEFCON level. Why did they do that? They have, for people who don't know, the DEFCON level, you get the DEFCON 1, we're at nuclear war. DEFCON 5, I guess, is peacetime.
Yes.
But what happened there?
Like you just said, we're in a worldwide posture of DEFCON 4. It's a state of readiness, but people equate it to nuclear readiness.
Right.
And Dr. Rice talking to, now we had an air threat conference, but she was talking to the president and monitoring. We were listening to Donald Rumsfeld, who was talking to the president, and he recommended that we up our posture, our nuclear defense posture, from defense condition 4 to a higher state of defense condition 3. Now, we haven't been to DEFCON 3 since the Yom Kippur War in Israel against Egypt since 1973.
Was there a nuclear threat?
We didn't know at the time, but it was the quickest way, because when a DEFCON condition changes, you don't need to worry about whether it's nuclear or whether it's conventional. The United States is under attack, and everyone, whether you're a Marine in Australia, a sailor in Japan, or an Army officer in Germany, everybody gets back to work. Recall rosters go out, bases get hardened, ships out of port, submarines to launch depth, bombers get loaded. Everybody move when a DEFCON condition changes.
Wow.
So President Bush said that's the quickest way to get the American military on an offensive war-type footing worldwide, when he changed our DEFCON condition from DEFCON 4 to DEFCON 3. He actually told us to stand by. They were thinking about going to DEFCON 2. The last time we were at DEFCON 2 was the Cuban Missile Crisis back in 1962, 40 years prior to that.
So our adversaries noticed too, right? I mean,
well, like I said, everything moves when a DEFCON. So our adversaries couldn't help but notice that all of our hot tip submarines that were hiding around the world, all of them for the first time in history blew ballast and came up to launch depth for DEFCON 3. Yeah. Our bombers got loaded. Our ships are out of port. Everybody's going out. They can see all the communications. They actually got nervous. So it was only a few minutes later that my phone rang, and it was the upstairs situation room again, saying they had President Putin holding for the President of the United States. Will I take the call?
You take the call.
And I laughed to myself. I'm here to do logistics. But I yelled over to Vice President Cheney, Mr. Vice President, I have President Putin holding for the President. Sir, will you take the call?
Wow.
And he told Dr. Rice, our national security advisor, to take the call.
Yeah. Me and your brothers, we think you're like Forrest Gump. You're just so, the rest of us are just, doing our thing, being milkmen, and you're out there just in the middle of history. Yeah.
And it wasn't my appointed place of duty, Neil, but like you would have, or anybody else would have, when you got called upon, you weren't going to walk away from it. You were going to run towards it.
Yeah.
And I just jumped on it.
And you've always been a great storyteller. And, you actually wrote a great book. It's on the back here, I know, but it's available. And this didn't happen for years after you got out of the Marine Corps, but I think it was an important story to tell, but you're a great storyteller. And I said, it's even more important, because I know you do talk about this a lot with speeches and other things, that it's a story that needs to be told. And certainly as the decades go by, even today, hearing this again, it's a story that needs to be told, because it's turmoil. It's certainly, the best laid plans don't stand up to the first contact with the enemy. It's the same thing. Like the communications with Air Force One didn't work. Communications with the pilots was bad. I mean, everything that probably could have went wrong, except that, we didn't shoot down the aircraft. We didn't shoot down the helicopter. I'm sure there's a million other things that happen as a result. So how did this day conclude for you?
Well, at the end of the day, now President Bush had had enough,
Mm.
and he canceled continuity of presidency, and he came back to Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
His mission for us, we thought the attack was over and he was back. He needed to address the American public. And down in the bunker, our job was to get the rest of the cabinet home.
Yeah.
He wanted to have an emergency cabinet meeting at 8 o'clock the next day.
Yeah.
And he was preparing to take our nation to war against terrorism,
Right.
especially Al Qaeda. We knew it was Osama bin Laden, and we knew it was Al Qaeda, and we knew they were being housed and protected by the Taliban.
Yeah.
And this is going to be halfway around the world. We're going to go defend freedom. And it was really important that we get to. So we stayed down there overnight, 24 hours. I was in the bunker helping get everybody home, all those cabinet members back to the United States, making sure we had logistics in place to get them home.
Yeah, because it was the ground order, right? No aircraft could fly anywhere. You know,
Right.
at least in the U.S., the U.S. airspace was closed.
Was closed.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So everything was a special air mission, getting everybody home. I eventually went home 24 hours later, and obviously, ran into Angela, who, wanted to hear the story of everything that was happening. And like everybody else, she had heard we shot down Flight 93.
Yeah.
And, I told her we hadn't, and she couldn't believe I was in the middle of it and the whole thing. So we literally walked away from each other, decompressed, put it all into perspective. And, I tell everybody that I have such pride in our country because we all knew we have the best military in the world, but 9/11 said we have the best civilians in the world.
Yeah.
Think about, we were back on our heels. We couldn't get going. And yet we heard ordinary people carrying complete strangers down the stairs in the World Trade Center towers, shopkeepers opening up their stores and their homes to take people in, ferry boat captains and regular, owners of boats shuttling people off the island, Pentagon, and obviously Tom Burnett and Todd Beamer. I said, wow, this country of ours is not just privileged, but it's united when attacked.
Yeah, and the Army, Green Berets that were on horseback lasing in attacks on the Taliban with B-52s. I mean, it just, it was very primitive in the very early stages, but they were determined to make sure that, that's the first response you're going to hear from the U.S. It was going to be effective. So that's impressive.
But when we talked about the communications failures of that day, the role of the National Command Authority, it really drove me to pick where I wanted to make a difference. So I decided I was going to help small companies and mid-sized companies make a difference in their planning and their ability to handle crises and make better decision making. So I ran off and got certified in that. This experience kind of drove the need in me to help fulfill that gap.
Yeah.
In our ability to be resilient as a nation.
Yeah. So you didn't immediately write the book. It was a couple years later. You had done some government consulting and things like that around logistics and crisis management. How did you get out of the Marine Corps? To what happened next?
I went to Naval Post Grad School right in 2002. And then from there, I went back to the Pentagon to do a 4-year Pentagon staff tour supporting the Chief of Naval Operations on the flying hour program. And that means everything in the Navy and the Marine Corps that flies needs training dollars and fuel and maintenance. And I was in charge of that budget, or, one of my people in charge of that budget, to make sure that we had the readiness that we needed across the board. Retired in 2007, got permission to write the book from the National Security Council, and the book came out in 2010.
Yeah.
And I've been running around not only sharing the story, but talking about the importance of having a plan and training to that plan and empowering your workforce to know their role in crises or, chaos, as you said earlier, so we can always stand tall in our nation, whether it's at home or at work, because we have a prepared workforce.
So tell me a little bit about culmination. Flash emergency management now. So tell me what that is and where did that come from?
Yeah. So the first business I started was, was a government-focused business called Quantitative Analytics, and was really supporting the flying hour program. And I ran that business for about 10 years, and there was, limited growth because it was just government-focused. I sold that business, but I wanted to get back to doing more, not just keynoting, but I wanted to do training and get into the technology side. So I started Flash Emergency Management. And that was really built on not only the ability to train a workforce, but to give them some technology. And we have an app called, Flash real-time communications app that we help businesses communicate encryptedly, and you know plenty about that. And we're trying to now get ourselves out there as a premier company to help those small and mid-sized companies not only write a plan, but exercise a plan and identify threats and include the workforce into what would you do? Where would you go? How would you communicate? So we don't have that chaos of 9/11 at their level when things are starting to go wrong.
So I want to focus on Flash because we know a lot about communications apps, but so Flash is a tool that a company would use, right? And not only does it just another way to communicate, another conference bridge, but it also facilitates, SOPs and special procedures that you might set up for a certain type of crisis. And we talk like,
That's right.
We always talk about Target, just an example, but when the Target's credit card terminals got hacked, all of a sudden that CIO and that's the CFO need to communicate not just with the internal security teams, but they got to talk with their PR, they got to talk with their lawyers. They would need something like a Flash to be able to just transcend, not like, oh, I'm on Teams, I'm on Zoom, I'm on this, I'm on that. That Flash is there just in case there's a crisis, but there would be a process and procedure that you would help define that would be inside of Flash that would help execute their process, their procedures for that type of crisis. Is that right?
That's well said.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. In most of those apps like Signal and WhatsApp and Teams and everything else is business to consumer, B2C.
Yeah.
We developed a B2B, a crisis communication app designed for business. Right. Meaning you got to be invited into your own network, your own intranet, if you will. There's no outside, there's no way you could have what happened with Signal and our Secretary of Defense right now can't happen with Flash real-time communications because they wouldn't have had their email and their phone number and their ID. They wouldn't have been a cleared user for the Flash emergency management app. And you're right. We have a data storage capability within the app to put your checklist and your procedures and your vendor numbers and everything else. So if you ran outside and you didn't have your white binder, you have everything you need that's already built into that app.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So not only do you have your fire extinguishers in your office, or someone has a heart attack, the device to revive them, you could have Flash on your employees' computers, and it's only there when, a crisis erupts to allow you to coordinate, communicate, and execute on a predetermined plan. And then also, if you have to have ad hoc, there's the ability to have real-time communication with like a conference.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Fascinating.
So basically, it's your white binder. It's your emergency white binder in your pocket.
So that was really driven from your experience, right?
Exactly right, Neil. And my experience of seeing, Donald Rumsfeld not being in the building and the chaos that ensued. And, this is a tool that is going to give all the decision makers the ability to locate their personnel and communicate with their vendors and their stakeholders and their legal team. And it doesn't matter if you're on the Appalachian Trail or you're right down in the thick of it, you have what you need to run your business and your team in chaos.
And sometimes, an app's an app, that's great, but you actually, with your tabletop, your staff and your teams will help consult and help them define what the process and procedure should be for a certain type of crisis. If it's a bank or insurance agency, or, we talk about banks not just getting robbed, but maybe there's a tornado or something happens and a branch gets blown open. How are you going to respond? It's important to get those stakeholders, maybe through, your help of, having that conversation and figuring out what the steps are. So they have elements of a plan to get coordinated, and then, when things blow over, obviously they can go back to their standing operating procedures, but the crisis plan is a little bit different.
Absolutely right, because you're talking about normally a vertical chain of command.
Yeah.
CEO on down. When a crisis happens, it goes horizontal, and the CEO needs to talk to the lowest level person in the company to find out what's happening.
Right.
So everybody's bypassed. There is no chain of command.
Right.
And now you're empowering every member of your team with the information they need to get the information to the decision makers to help recover faster.
So that is like the National Command Authority, Cheney's in the parking lot with the bucket brigade again, and Bush's communications just aren't working. He's obviously, there's a history channel special where you actually talk a lot about, you're on that special, I think, where they talk about what happened that day and where the communication failures happened. But I think that drove you to at least to have Flash as a resource.
Yeah, you're spot on. And today, 25 years now, we're coming up next year, 25th anniversary, and I'm still as committed today as I ever was to make sure 9/11 doesn't happen, not just on our national level, but even on a community level.
We had another Marine where we were talking a little bit involved with restaurants, and it was just, it's Riffian Group, and they have several restaurants in town, different concepts. And we just talked about the impact of COVID. Nobody saw that happening, but you do see the ingenuity and other things that people do to work around it. Do you think that people's memory is short? Do you think that, what message would you have the key stakeholders to say, you can't plan for everything, but you got to have a culture of planning. You definitely got to have an if then else type scenario for keeping the business continuity going. Is that right?
Yeah, Neil, you're spot on. In our country, everybody's memory is short, right?
Yeah.
They're worried about their next bottom line, their next report. But 9/11 had changed us. But I try to remind people that most companies don't come back.
Right.
After that, either you lose trust in your leadership.
Right.
When, you get scared or you don't have a plan, you realize I'm very vulnerable here. Maybe this is not the best company for me.
Right.
And I'm hoping to really inspire those leaders of those companies to own it, to be that proactive boss, not just a reactive boss, but be that proactive boss to empower your workforce, give them the authority to make some critical decisions based on a predetermined plan.
Yeah.
To maybe save the company, save the data, save a life, do whatever, and elevate their ability to trust you and their authority to make the tough call.
So kind of the full circle here, the end, from your Marine experience, you kind of got through your own crisis, and you've actually been a witness of these through the book and other things. You can realize the whole story of how a 9/11 happens, where the shortcomings are. What's next for you? And what message would you have to a young Marine who might be thinking about getting out, or what jobs to take, or what MLS to go after? How did the Marine Corps prepare you for your career?
Again, just a great question. Whether you're a young Marine or old Marine, they don't realize the value of their training until later on, when they say, wow, I learned that in boot camp, or I learned that in my MOS school, or I learned that when I deployed my first time, is to really embrace your time in the Marine Corps. Everybody gets out of the Marine Corps, whether you're there for 4 years or you're there for 40 years, everybody gets out. And it's not just an MOS or just a job. It's a time in your life that you're getting top-notch training, and you're around just incredible American patriots, and you need to absorb all of it. Yes, there's horrible days and you'll laugh at each other, but embrace the time and absorb everything the Marine Corps has given you, because there's no doubt in my mind, as there was since 9/11, that you're going to use every single bit of it, whether you're a titan in business or whether you're just a camp counselor. You're going to apply that Marine Corps training to all facets of your life.
Man, that's really a fascinating story. For everybody listening, it's 24 hours inside the President's Bunker, 9/11/01. I encourage you to purchase the book. It's an easy read. It really is. And there's a lot more that we didn't talk about here that's actually included in the book. So I encourage people to do that. And in addition, you do a lot of speaking and other things, I don't say motivational speaking, but you do keynotes and things like that. So tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, they can find me at robertjdarling.com, no periods, robertjdarling.com. And it is not just a historic keynote, but it's an inspirational keynote to empower your workforce to take charge and embrace their value in the company, just beyond their role and responsibility, to what they could do to protect the company from losing its ability to function after crisis. And I'm happy to train the workforce, speak to your audience, do whatever, reach out to me. I'm on, you'll find me all over the place, but robertjdarling.com. And I thank you, Neil, for taking the time today to share this new venture with me. I think it's great. And there's no better person in business than you. A little plug from me to you.
Excellent.
But Neil on Business, and I couldn't be more proud of you.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Thanks for tuning in to Neil on Business. If today's episode hit home, do me a favor. Leave a review, share it with a friend, and subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next. And if you're ready to lead with clarity, courage, and confidence, keep showing up. Until next time, stay sharp, stay focused, and keep building. Again, this is Neil Darling from Ring Spaces Studio, and this is Neil on Business. We'll see you next time.